Turning 25 felt like it was supposed to mean something. At least, that's what everyone always said. It was the age when you were no longer figuring life out, you were supposed to have already started building it. For me, it was just another day until my parents insisted on throwing a birthday dinner. That alone surprised me. My parents had never been the celebrating type. Birthdays in our house were usually quiet, sometimes a simple happy birthday, sometimes nothing at all. So when my mother called a week earlier and said they had reserved a table at one of the nicest restaurants in town, I felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Maybe things were changing. Maybe they finally saw me. When I arrived at the restaurant that evening, the place was warm with soft lighting and the quiet clinking of glasses. A long table had already been set up, and several relatives were there. My aunt and uncle, 2 cousins, and even a couple of my parents' friends. "Look who finally made it," my father said with a half-smile as I walked in. My mother gave me a quick hug, the kind that lasted just long enough to appear affectionate in front of others. Still, I told myself not to overthink it. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. Dinner went smoothly at first. Plates of food arrived, conversations overlapped, and people laughed. My aunt asked about my job, and my cousins teased me about getting older. For the first time in years, I felt like I actually belonged at that table. Halfway through the meal, the waiter brought out a small chocolate cake with a candle in the center. Everyone clapped politely. "Make a wish," my cousin joked. I smiled and blew out the candle, feeling strangely emotional. Maybe this really was a new beginning. Then my father stood up. He lifted his glass and tapped it lightly with a fork. The table slowly went quiet. "Well," he said with a chuckle, "our kid here is 25 today." A few people nodded and raised their glasses. He continued, "Raising a child isn't easy. Lots of sacrifices. Lots of expenses." There was another round of light laughter. But then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Honestly," he added casually, "we only kept you for the tax benefits." For a second, the entire table went silent. Then a few people laughed awkwardly, assuming it was a joke. I forced a small smile too, waiting for him to laugh and say he was kidding, but he didn't. Instead, my mother shrugged and said, "Well, that's not entirely wrong." The words hit harder than I expected. Something inside my chest tightened as the room suddenly felt smaller. The laughter around the table faded into a dull noise in my ears. They weren't joking. They said it so casually, like it was a harmless truth. Like the last 25 years of my life could be reduced to a line on a tax return. I stared down at the half-melted candle on the cake, trying to process what I had just heard. And in that moment, surrounded by family and birthday decorations, I realized something that would change everything. Maybe I had never really been their child at all. I barely remember the rest of that birthday dinner. People kept talking, forks clinked against plates, and the waiter eventually cut the cake, but everything felt distant, like I was watching the evening happen from across the room instead of sitting at the table. My father moved on to another story, laughing with my uncle as if nothing unusual had been said. My mother continued eating her dessert calmly, occasionally joining the conversation. No apology. No explanation. Not even a "I was joking." That hurt the most. When the dinner finally ended, everyone hugged goodbye and wished me a happy birthday again. My aunt told me, "Your dad has a strange sense of humor," trying to smooth over the awkwardness. But deep down, I knew it wasn't humor. It was honesty. The drive home was quiet. Streetlights flashed across the windshield as I replayed the moment again and again in my mind. "We only kept you for the tax benefits." At first, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Parents say weird things sometimes. Maybe it really was just a bad joke. But the more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable memories started resurfacing. Suddenly, my childhood didn't feel random anymore. When I was 10, I won a small school science competition. I remember bringing the certificate home, excited to show my parents. My mother glanced at it for 2 seconds before putting it on the counter. "That's nice," she said, already walking away. The certificate stayed on that counter for weeks before I quietly threw it away. Then there was my high school graduation. Other parents filled the parking lot with balloons and cameras. My father arrived late and left right after the ceremony ended. "We've seen graduations before," he said on the way home. Even birthdays had always felt like an obligation rather than a celebration. Most years, dinner was just whatever happened to be in the fridge. Looking back, something else stood out too. My parents always seemed unusually interested in paperwork whenever tax season came around. I remembered them asking strange questions. "Are you still listed as living here? Did you file anything yet? Don't worry about the forms. We'll handle it." At the time, I never thought much about it. I trusted them. They were my parents, after all. But now the pieces felt like they were starting to connect. When I reached my apartment that night, I sat on the couch in complete silence. The leftover echo of laughter from the restaurant still rang in my ears. Part of me wanted to call them and demand an explanation. Another part of me was afraid of what they might say. So instead, I opened my laptop and started looking through old documents, tax forms, financial records, anything I still had saved from previous years. At first, I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. I just had a strange feeling. The kind of feeling you get when something has been wrong for a long time and you're only just beginning to see it. And deep down, I had the unsettling suspicion that my father's joke at dinner wasn't just a cruel comment. It might have been the truth hiding in plain sight. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. My head was still heavy from the thoughts that had kept me awake most of the night. No matter how hard I tried to shake it off, my father's words kept replaying in my mind. "We only kept you for the tax benefits." At first it sounded like a cruel joke, but something about the way he said it felt too casual, too confident. As if he wasn't worried about the truth slipping out. That was the part that bothered me. So instead of going straight to work, I made coffee and sat down with my laptop again. My apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. I opened my email and searched for every tax document I had saved over the years. Most of them were normal, pay stubs, digital receipts, and a few basic tax returns from when I first started working after college. Nothing unusual stood out at first. But then I remembered something. My parents had always insisted on helping with my taxes when I was younger. Even after I moved out at 22, my mother occasionally asked strange questions during tax season. "Did you already file? Don't forget to send us your address. It's easier if we just handle it." Back then, I thought they were just being helpful. Now I wasn't so sure. I logged into my online tax account and started going through my filing history more carefully. The numbers seemed normal until I noticed something strange in one of the older records. For 2 years after I moved out, someone had still claimed me as a dependent. My stomach tightened. That wasn't possible. I had been living on my own during that time, paying my own rent and bills. Legally, I shouldn't have been listed as anyone's dependent anymore. But the records clearly showed that someone had claimed the credit. And there was only one place it could have come from: my parents. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen while a slow realization crept in. If they had claimed me as a dependent when they shouldn't have, they would have received thousands of dollars in tax benefits. Money that they technically weren't entitled to. My mind started racing. Had they done it just once, or every year? I kept digging through the records, checking every filing I could access. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. There were multiple years where my information had clearly been used in ways I didn't fully understand. My social security number, my name, my identity, all tied to filings I had never approved. Suddenly, my father's comment at dinner didn't sound like a joke at all. It sounded like a confession. A cold wave of anger and disbelief washed over me. For 25 years, I had always assumed my parents were simply distant or emotionally unavailable. But this felt different. This felt calculated. I closed my laptop slowly, my hands shaking slightly. If what I was seeing was true, then my parents hadn't just treated me like a financial benefit when I was a kid. They might still be doing it. And if any of those filings were considered fraudulent, there was a terrifying possibility I couldn't ignore. My name was on the records too, which meant if anyone ever investigated those taxes, I might be the one blamed for it. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus on anything else. I went to work, sat at my desk, opened emails, and attended meetings, but my mind wasn't there. Every few minutes, the same thought returned like a stubborn echo. What if my parents had been using my identity for years? The idea felt almost impossible to accept. Parents weren't supposed to do things like that. They might be strict, distant, or even unfair, but fraud? Using their own child's identity for money? Yet the documents I had seen that morning refused to leave my mind. That evening, I went straight home and opened my laptop again. This time, I decided to look deeper. I logged into every financial account I had access to, old tax portals, credit report websites, anything that might show activity linked to my name. The more information I gathered, the clearer the picture became. My parents had claimed me as a dependent for at least 3 years after I moved out. 3 years. That meant thousands of dollars in tax credits they were never supposed to receive. But that wasn't the worst part. As I continued searching, something else appeared on my credit report that made my heart skip. An account I didn't recognize. It was a small financial account, nothing huge, but it had been opened several years earlier using my personal information. The address listed for it wasn't my apartment. It was my parents' house. I stared at the screen in disbelief. At that moment, everything suddenly felt darker than I had imagined. This wasn't just about tax benefits anymore. They had used my identity. I tried to stay calm and think logically. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it was some kind of mistake or old account I had forgotten about. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. My parents had always been very careful with money. My father used to spend hours talking about tax deductions and financial strategies. He treated taxes like a puzzle that needed to be solved every year. And now I was starting to realize something terrifying. Maybe I had always been part of that puzzle. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my forehead while the weight of the situation slowly settled on me. If the authorities ever looked closely at those records, my name would appear everywhere. On the filings, on the accounts, on the identity information, which meant that legally it might look like I was involved. The thought made my stomach twist. My parents hadn't just treated me like a tax benefit. They might have unknowingly put me at serious risk. For a moment, anger flared inside me. I imagined calling them immediately and demanding answers. But just as quickly, another thought stopped me. If I confronted them now, they would deny everything. Or worse, they would start covering their tracks. No. If I wanted the truth, and if I wanted to protect myself, I needed to be smarter than that. Slowly, I closed the laptop again. For 25 years, I had always been the quiet child. The one who avoided conflict. The one who accepted whatever my parents did, without questioning it. But that version of me was starting to disappear. Because if my parents really had used me like a financial tool all these years, then it was time for me to start paying attention. And this time, I wasn't going to be the one getting used. For the next few days, I acted like nothing had happened. That was the hardest part. Every instinct in my body wanted to call my parents and demand an explanation. I wanted to hear them try to justify what they had done. I wanted to know how long it had been going on and why they thought it was acceptable. But I knew confronting them right away would be a mistake. If they really had been using my identity for years, they would only do one thing when accused. They would hide the evidence. So instead, I stayed quiet. I went to work like normal. I answered their occasional text messages with short replies. When my mother asked if I enjoyed the birthday dinner, I simply wrote, "It was fine." Inside, though, everything had changed. Every evening after work, I continued digging through financial records. I downloaded copies of my credit reports, tax filings, and bank history. I started organizing everything into folders on my computer, year by year, document by document. The deeper I looked, the clearer the pattern became. My parents had repeatedly claimed tax benefits tied to my name long after I was financially independent. And that mysterious financial account linked to my parents' address still bothered me. Even though the balance was small, its existence meant one thing. My personal information had been used without my permission. That crossed a line I couldn't ignore. One night, while reviewing everything again, I realized something important. If I wanted to protect myself, I needed proof, not just suspicion. So I started building a timeline. I wrote down the years I moved out, the dates of tax filings, and when that unknown account was opened. Slowly, the story began to take shape like pieces of a puzzle finally connecting. And with every new detail, my anger grew. Not loud anger. Cold anger. The kind that sits quietly in your chest and waits. At the same time, I started focusing on something else, my future. For years, I had been stuck in the same mid-level position at work, doing good work, but never really pushing myself forward. I realized that part of me had always been trying to earn approval from parents who were never going to give it. That realization hit harder than anything else. So I stopped waiting for approval. I updated my resume, applied for internal promotions, and started networking with people in higher departments. For the first time in a long while, I was thinking about what I wanted instead of worrying about what my family thought. Weeks passed. My parents occasionally called, but I kept the conversations short. They didn't seem to notice anything different, which almost made it worse. To them, everything was normal. But to me, everything had changed. One evening, while finishing another long day at work, my phone buzzed with an email notification from the company's internal hiring department. I opened it casually, expecting another routine message. Instead, I froze when I read the subject line. Promotion interview invitation. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. After everything that had happened, this felt like the first real step forward in my life. And as a strange sense of determination settled inside me, I realized something important. My parents may have spent years treating me like a financial advantage, but from now on, I was going to start becoming something far more dangerous to them. Independent. The promotion interview happened faster than I expected. Just 2 weeks after receiving the email, I found myself sitting in a glass-walled conference room on the 22nd floor of our company building. Across the table were 2 senior managers and the director of our department. Normally, an interview like this would have made me nervous, but something about the past few weeks had changed my mindset completely. Compared to the mess my parents had dragged me into, answering questions about leadership and project management felt almost easy. For once, I wasn't trying to impress anyone for approval. I was simply showing them what I could already do. The interview lasted nearly an hour. We talked about my projects, my performance over the last few years, and how I would handle larger responsibilities. I answered honestly and confidently, without overthinking every word. When it ended, the director smiled slightly.
"Thank you," she said.
"We'll be making our decision soon." Normally, those words would have left me anxious for days. But as I walked out of the building that afternoon, I felt strangely calm. No matter what happened, I knew something had shifted in my life. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that birthday dinner weeks earlier. 3 days later, the call came. I was at my desk finishing a report when my phone rang. The caller ID showed the director's name. My heart skipped once before I answered.
"Hi," she said.
"I'll get straight to the point. We'd like to offer you the promotion." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then she continued explaining the details, a leadership role, a significant salary increase, and responsibility for a much larger team. It was the kind of opportunity that could completely change a career. When the call ended, I sat there staring at my desk for a long time. It wasn't just the promotion that mattered. It was what it represented. Freedom. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was fully standing on my own. I wasn't relying on anyone, not financially, not emotionally, not in any way. And that realization brought something else with it. Confidence. That evening, I celebrated quietly by ordering takeout and sitting on my apartment balcony. The city lights stretched across the distance while a cool breeze moved through the streets below. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. "We haven't heard from you much lately. Everything okay?" I stared at the message for a moment. It was strange how normal her words sounded, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't casually admitted at dinner that my existence had been reduced to tax benefits. I typed back a short reply, "Busy with work," which wasn't a lie, but there was something she didn't know. Over the past few weeks, I hadn't just been improving my career. I had also been quietly collecting every document connected to my identity. Tax filings, credit reports, account histories, everything. And now that my life was finally moving forward, I realized something important. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was preparing for the moment when the truth would come out. Because sooner or later, the system that my parents had been playing with for years was going to notice the irregularities. And when that moment came, I was going to make sure one thing was absolutely clear. I wasn't the one responsible. They were. Tax season arrived again faster than I expected. For most people, it was just another yearly chore, collecting forms, filing returns, and hoping for a small refund. But for me, this year felt different. This time, I wasn't letting anyone else handle anything connected to my name. Everything would be done properly. Everything would be documented. One Saturday morning, I spread all my paperwork across the dining table in my apartment. Printed tax records, notes from my timeline, and screenshots of my credit reports formed neat piles in front of me. Looking at it all together made the situation even clearer. For years, my parents had claimed benefits using my information. Some of those claims directly conflicted with my own financial records. It wasn't just unethical. It could easily be considered fraud. For a long time, the idea of reporting it felt impossible. They were still my parents, after all. Part of me kept hoping there was some misunderstanding hidden somewhere in the paperwork. But every document told the same story. They had used my identity when it benefited them. And the birthday dinner confession proved something else. They didn't even feel guilty about it. I stared at my laptop screen for a long time that morning before finally opening the tax authorities' reporting page. My fingers hesitated above the keyboard. This was the point of no return. Once I submitted anything, it could trigger a review of past filings. Questions would be asked. Records would be checked. Investigations might begin. And if that happened, my parents would know exactly where it started. With me, a strange mix of emotions filled my chest. Fear, anger, and a small but growing sense of relief. For years, I had been the quiet one in the family, the one who avoided conflict, the one who let uncomfortable things slide because confronting them felt too exhausting. But that version of me had already started to disappear. Slowly, carefully, I filled out the form. I explained that I had recently discovered tax filings connected to my identity that I had never authorized. I attached copies of documents showing the years I had been financially independent and living at a different address. I didn't accuse anyone directly. I simply presented the facts. When I finally clicked submit, the screen refreshed and displayed a confirmation message. The report had been received. Just like that, it was done. For a few minutes, I sat there staring at the screen, half expecting something dramatic to happen immediately. But nothing did. The apartment was silent. The refrigerator hummed quietly in the background. Outside, someone's dog barked in the distance. Life continued normally. Except now, somewhere inside the tax authorities system, a small flag had probably appeared next to several years of filings connected to my name. Sooner or later, someone would look at it. And when they did, the pattern would be impossible to ignore. Later that evening, my phone suddenly started buzzing on the table. One message, then another, then 3 more, all from family members. I frowned and picked up the phone, opening the first text from my mother. The message was short. Did you report something about our taxes? My stomach tightened as more messages continued appearing on the screen. It seemed the truth had started moving faster than I expected, and the fallout was just beginning. My phone didn't stop buzzing for the next 10 minutes. Text messages stacked on top of each other faster than I could read them. My mother sent 3 in a row. My father called twice. Even my aunt, who usually stayed out of family drama, sent a short message asking what was going on. Something had clearly reached them. I sat on my couch staring at the screen, my heart beating faster with every new notification. The first message from my mother kept repeating in my mind. Did you report something about our taxes? The fact that she asked that question told me everything I needed to know. She already suspected the truth. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I placed the phone on the table and walked to the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water while trying to slow my breathing. This moment had always been a possibility. I knew that when I submitted that report, it could eventually lead back to my parents. I just didn't expect it to happen so quickly. When I returned to the couch, the phone started ringing again. This time it was my father. I watched the screen until the call ended. A few seconds later, another text appeared. Call us immediately. The message wasn't emotional or worried. It sounded like an order. For 25 years, that kind of tone would have worked on me. I would have called right away, trying to fix whatever problem they believed I had caused. But things were different now. I picked up the phone and typed a short reply. "What's going on?" 3 dots appeared almost instantly as my mother began typing. Her response came quickly. "The tax office contacted us today about previous filings. They said there are inconsistencies connected to your records." My chest tightened slightly. So it had already begun. The system had moved faster than I expected, and someone had started reviewing the information. Another message followed immediately. "Did you tell them something?" For a moment, I just stared at the screen. This was the moment where the old version of me might have panicked. I might have apologized or tried to calm them down, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. But the truth was simple. I had only corrected my own records. They were the ones who had created the problem. My phone rang again before I could respond. My father's name flashed across the screen. This time, I answered. "Hello." His voice came through sharp and tense. "What did you do?" he demanded. I kept my voice calm. "I filed my taxes properly." "That's not what I'm asking," he snapped. "The tax office is reviewing several past years. They said your information triggered it." There was a pause between us. For the first time in my life, I could hear real panic in his voice. Not anger, not authority.
Fear.
I leaned back against the couch and spoke slowly. "If there's a review," I said, "then they must have found something worth reviewing." Silence filled the line for a few seconds. Then my father said something that confirmed everything I had suspected. "You need to call them and fix this," he said urgently. "Fix this." As if the truth was a mistake that needed to be erased. As if the years of filings connected to my name had never happened. I closed my eyes briefly before answering. "No," I said calmly. And in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. The fallout had only just begun. 2 days after the phone call, my parents asked to meet in person. Actually, asked wasn't the right word. My father had sent a message that sounded more like a command. "Come to the house tonight. We need to talk." For most of my life, that sentence would have filled me with anxiety. The house I grew up in had always carried a strange atmosphere, quiet tension hiding behind polite conversations. But this time, things were different. I wasn't going there as a child anymore. I was going as someone who finally understood the truth. That evening, I drove to the neighborhood where I had spent my childhood. The streets looked exactly the same houses, same trees, same quiet sidewalks. It felt strange how a place could look so familiar and yet feel completely different. When I parked in front of the house, the porch light was already on. My parents were waiting inside. As soon as I walked through the door, I could feel the tension in the air. My mother sat at the dining table with her arms folded, while my father paced slowly near the window. Neither of them smiled. "You took your time," my father said. I placed my keys on the table and sat down calmly. "You said you wanted to talk." My mother spoke first. "The tax office contacted us again today," she said, her voice tight. "They're reviewing several past filings." I nodded slightly. That's what happens during an investigation. My father stopped pacing and turned toward me. "This isn't an investigation," he snapped. "It's a misunderstanding that you caused." I looked at him for a moment before answering. "I didn't cause anything. I corrected my own records." The room went quiet. My mother leaned forward, her expression frustrated. "You should have talked to us first," she said. "Families solve things privately." I almost laughed at that. "Privately?" I repeated. "You used my identity for years without telling me." My father's jaw tightened. "We supported you your whole life," he said. "After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us?" There it was. The guilt argument. It had worked on me for years. But this time, it didn't land the same way. I leaned back in the chair, studying their faces. For the first time, I wasn't intimidated by them. Instead, I saw something else. Desperation. "You remember my birthday dinner?" I asked calmly. They both hesitated. "You stood up and told everyone the reason you kept me was for tax benefits," I continued. "Those were your words." My father looked away. "That was a joke," he muttered. "No," I said quietly. "It wasn't." Silence filled the room again. For a moment, no one spoke. Finally, my mother tried one last time. You need to call them and explain that this is all a misunderstanding, she said. Tell them you made a mistake. I shook my head slowly. I didn't make a mistake. My father slammed his hand against the table. If this investigation continues, we could owe a lot of money. I held his gaze without flinching. Then I said the one sentence that ended the conversation. You told everyone you kept me for the tax benefits, I said. I paused before finishing. Well, now the benefits are gone. Neither of them had a response. And for the first time in my life, I stood up from that table knowing I had finally taken back control. After that confrontation, I didn't look back. The investigation forced my parents to repay years of fraudulent claims. I didn't gloat or celebrate. They were still my parents, but the dynamic between us had shifted forever. For 25 years, I had been treated like a financial tool, a passive participant in their schemes. Now, I was no longer silent. The first week after our confrontation, I finally felt the weight of freedom settle over me. I didn't have to worry about hiding my own records, defending myself from their misuse, or tolerating their passive-aggressive lessons on life. Every late-night worry, every birthday disappointment, every dismissive comment from my childhood no longer had power over me. Work became my sanctuary. The promotion I had earned weeks earlier gave me not just a higher salary, but a sense of authority and independence that I had never experienced before. I started leading my team confidently, making decisions without hesitation, and realizing that I didn't need anyone's approval to succeed. The knowledge that I could stand on my own gave me a strength I didn't know I possessed. Evenings, which had once been filled with replaying their words in my mind, became peaceful. I spent time on things I truly enjoyed, reading, writing, taking long walks, and reconnecting with friends who had always supported me. Slowly, the person I had been, a timid, deferential child, was replaced by someone self-assured and assertive. I didn't forgive my parents. That kind of betrayal was too deep, too calculated, and too long-lasting. But I didn't need to. The power I had gained, the control over my own life, was more important. I realized that revenge isn't always about punishment. Sometimes, it's about reclaiming your life and refusing to be defined by those who wronged you. Months later, I attended another family event, not out of obligation, but by choice. My parents approached me cautiously, offering polite smiles and hollow apologies. I listened quietly, nodded politely, and then excused myself. For the first time, I felt no anxiety, no desire to please, and no lingering fear. I was no longer trapped by their opinions, manipulations, or expectations. That birthday dinner, the one where they casually announced they had only kept me for the tax benefits, had been a turning point. What they intended as a moment of humiliation became the catalyst for my transformation. That night, their words planted the seed, but it was my determination, intelligence, and patience that allowed me to grow. I had taken my life back. And as I sat alone on my balcony, watching the city lights stretch into the distance, I finally understood something essential. Happiness isn't given. It isn't inherited. And it certainly isn't dictated by anyone else. It is claimed. And I had claimed mine. For the first time in my life, I was truly free.